The apartment was modern and minimalist, perched on the 23rd floor of a glass tower in Shinjuku. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the neon lights of Tokyo into blurred watercolors of red and white. Inside, Akira Saito slept soundly, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep slumber. He was a successful man, the CEO of a marketing firm, married to a beautiful wife who was currently on a business trip in Osaka, father of 2 children studying abroad in Canada. By all accounts, he had everything anyone could want. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 3:17 in the morning. A shadow moved through the living room without making a sound. No footsteps. No creaking furniture. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in black, with a hood pulled low over the face. It moved with the patience of someone who had done this many times before, someone who knew exactly where to step. The bedroom door was already slightly open. The shadow paused there for a long moment, simply watching. Through the gap, Akira's sleeping form was visible, vulnerable, completely unaware. The shadow entered the room. For a minute, it stood at the foot of the bed, observing. Not touching anything. Just watching the rise and fall of Akira's breathing. Then slowly, the figure raised an old Polaroid camera. Click. Flash. Akira's eyes snapped open. For a split second, their gazes met through the darkness. Then the figure turned and vanished into the hallway. By the time Akira stumbled out of bed, the apartment was completely empty. The front door was still locked. The windows sealed. It was as if the intruder had never existed. Except for the photograph on his pillow. Akira picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of himself sleeping. On the back, written in red ink with elegant calligraphy, was a message that would haunt him forever: "I saw who you really are." The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department was housed in a massive building in Kasumigaseki, with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Detective Haruka Tanaka sat at her desk, surrounded by case files and coffee cups. She was 28 but looked younger, with a round face and serious eyes that always seemed to be looking past whatever was in front of her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She rarely smiled. But she noticed everything. On the wall above her desk, she had pinned 7 Polaroid photographs. 7 sleeping faces. 7 identical messages on the back in that same elegant calligraphy. The press had dubbed the perpetrator the Ghost, a mysterious intruder who broke into apartments, took photos of sleeping victims, and vanished without stealing anything. Inspector Yamashita approached her desk, dropping a fresh case file in front of her. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much. "Number 8, he said flatly. "Same method." Shinjuku, 3:17 a.m., Polaroid photo, message on the back. The victim is a 47-year-old accountant. Married, 2 kids, no criminal record. Haruka opened the file and studied the new photograph. No signs of forced entry. Building security showed a figure entering at 2:45 and leaving at 3:22. Face covered. No usable footage. She placed the new photo on her wall next to the others. 7 had become 8. She stepped back and studied them together. The victims' ages ranged from 40 to 65. Different professions, neighborhoods, backgrounds. On the surface, they had nothing in common. "Birth records," she murmured quietly. It took Haruka 3 hours and considerable bureaucratic persuasion to get what she needed from the city archives. By midnight, she was still at her desk, surrounded by printouts, illuminated only by her computer screen. She had created a detailed spreadsheet with all 8 victims, listing their names, ages, addresses, and places of birth. At first glance, they appeared to be random Tokyo residents. But as she cross-referenced their birth records with old-school registries, a pattern emerged. All 8 had been born within a 6-month period. All 8 had been registered at the same maternity clinic in the Asakusa district, a small private clinic that had closed 20 years ago. And all 8 had attended the same elementary school, Asakusa First Municipal Elementary, which had been demolished 15 years earlier. Haruka's heart quickened. She pulled up old newspaper archives from 20 years ago. It took another hour of scrolling, but finally she found what she was looking for. A small article from the Tokyo Shimbun, dated August 15, 20 years ago, girl disappears from Asakusa neighborhood. 10-year-old Yuki Nakamura had vanished on her way home from school. She was last seen near the Sumida River at approximately 4:30 p.m. Despite an extensive search, no trace of the girl was ever found. No witnesses. No suspects. No body. The case went cold within months. Haruka stared at the grayscale photograph. A young girl with a round face and serious eyes smiled back at her from across 2 decades. Yuki Nakamura had been wearing a school uniform and carrying a yellow backpack. She had been only 10 years old. The family. Haruka scrolled down, looking for names. Yuki's parents, both deceased now. And her older brother, Kenji Nakamura, then 15, now 35 and still alive. She typed his name into the police database. His file came up instantly, no criminal record, no fixed address, listed as transient. The last known sighting was 3 years ago, when he was picked up for sleeping in Ueno Park and released with a warning. Haruka printed his photograph, a booking photo from that encounter. A man with hollow cheeks and intense eyes stared back at her. Even in the grainy image, there was something unsettling about his gaze. He looked like someone who had spent years watching from the shadows. She pinned his photo next to the 8 sleeping victims. The ghost now had a name. Haruka didn't sleep that night. She mapped out every known location associated with Kenji over the past 2 decades. The Asakusa neighborhood where he grew up. The parks where he'd been spotted. She created a heat map and cross-referenced it with the ghost's attacks. The overlap was undeniable. All 8 incidents occurred within areas Kenji frequented. But why? What connection could there be between these victims and a girl who vanished 2 decades ago? Haruka pulled up the school records again. Asakusa First Municipal Student Registry was still available. She cross-referenced the names of Yuki's classmates from 20 years ago, the year she disappeared. There were 32 students in Yuki's 5th grade class. She compared them to her list of 8 victims. And there it was. A perfect match. Akira Saito, the first victim, had been in Yuki's class. Michiko Hayashi, the second victim, was also a classmate. Takashi Mori, the third victim, had been their teacher that year. All 8 victims were directly connected to Yuki Nakamura's disappearance. They had either been her classmates or her teachers during that fateful year. Haruka leaned back, her mind racing. Kenji Nakamura wasn't randomly targeting sleeping residents. He was systematically visiting everyone who had known his sister. Everyone who might have seen something, known something, or perhaps done something 20 years ago. The question haunted her, what did he want from them? At 6:47 a.m., her phone rang shrilly. It was the night desk sergeant. Tanaka, another incident in Shinjuku, same method, but this time the victim was awake. The intruder didn't run. He talked to her for several minutes. Haruka was on her feet. "Give me the address. Now." 20 minutes later, she stood in a small apartment in Shinjuku, facing a woman who would change everything. The victim was Michiko Hayashi, the 42-year-old bookshop owner, the second person the ghost had visited, now visited again. Michiko sat on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of untouched tea beside her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were alert. She was frightened, but strangely, there was something else in her expression. Something like relief, or recognition. "He came back," Michiko whispered. "At exactly 3:17 a.m. I wasn't sleeping this time. I barely slept since the first time he came. I was sitting here reading, and suddenly he was just standing in the doorway," Michiko continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't make a sound. One moment the doorway was empty, the next he was there, like he'd materialized from the darkness." "What did he want?" Haruka asked gently. Michiko looked up, and Haruka saw something unexpected in her expression. Not just fear, but deep, soul-crushing guilt buried for decades. "He asked me about Yuki. If I remembered her. If I remembered being her friend. Then he said, she trusted you. She told you her secret. And you did nothing to help her." Haruka's pulse quickened. "You knew Yuki? You were her friend?" Michiko nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We were 10. We sat together at lunch. Yuki was different from the other children, quieter, more thoughtful. She always seemed to be carrying some heavy weight." "What did she tell you?" Michiko was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with 2 decades of buried guilt. "About 2 weeks before she disappeared, Yuki told me something. She made me promise not to tell anyone. I kept that promise. Even when she vanished. Even when the police questioned me. I was 10 years old, and I was terrified." "What did she tell you, Michiko?" Michiko's eyes filled with fresh tears. "She told me someone at school was hurting her. Not physically, but they were making her do things. Taking her to a room after classes. She never said exactly what happened. She was too ashamed. But she said it was someone she trusted completely, someone who was supposed to protect her. She showed me a drawing once, a man's face, but the features were all wrong, twisted like something from a nightmare," Michiko continued, her voice cracking. "I asked who it was, and she said, if I tell you his name, he'll hurt my brother. I can't let anyone hurt Kenji." Haruka felt a cold knot in her stomach. "Did you tell anyone after she disappeared? Any of the investigators?" Michiko shook her head miserably. "I was a child. I was scared. And then Yuki was gone, and I thought if I said something, maybe they'd think I was involved. So I kept quiet. For 20 years, I've kept quiet, and it's been eating me alive. And now Kenji Nakamura has found you." Michiko nodded, wiping her tears. "He didn't threaten me. He just stood there with those sad, hollow eyes and said, you were her friend. She trusted you. And you let her down. But I'm not here for revenge. I need you to remember. I need to know who did this to my sister. And you're going to help me find the truth." Haruka stood slowly, her mind racing. Kenji Nakamura wasn't a criminal mastermind seeking vengeance. He was a brother who had spent 20 years searching for the truth about his little sister. And now he was running out of time. Haruka knew the law well. In Japan, many crimes have a statute of limitations. The statute for any crime connected to Yuki's disappearance would expire very soon. Once the date passed, whoever hurt her would walk free forever. Kenji wasn't trying to punish anyone. He was trying to beat the clock. Haruka returned to the station with a new understanding. This was no longer a simple investigation of a serial intruder. This was a cold case murder investigation with a ticking clock, and the primary suspect was also her only potential witness. She pulled up everything on Yuki's disappearance. The original investigation had been thorough but fruitless. Detectives interviewed everyone, but no one reported anything unusual. The case went cold within months. But now, with Michiko's revelation, Haruka saw the case in a new light. Someone at that school had been hurting Yuki. Someone she trusted. Someone who threatened to hurt Kenji if she told. That same person might have been the last to see her alive. She needed to find Kenji before the statute ran out. But Kenji was a ghost, moving through shadows with 2 decades of practice. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. A text appeared, "You're getting close, detective. Meet me at the Sumida River at sunset. Come alone. I'll tell you everything." Haruka's heart pounded. She typed back, "How do I know this is really you?" A moment later, her phone buzzed again with a photograph that made her blood run cold. It was a Polaroid of herself, taken from outside the station window moments ago. She looked up sharply, scanning the street, but saw only the usual flow of pedestrians. On the back, written in that same red ink, was another message, "You are being watched too, detective. Always." Haruka made a decision that would change everything. She told Inspector Yamashita she was following a lead but omitted the details. Then she left for the Sumida River, where Yuki Nakamura had last been seen alive 20 years ago. The sunset was spectacular, a blaze of orange and pink reflected in the dark water. Tourists lined the riverbank, but Haruka's eyes searched the shadows for a man who had spent 2 decades hiding in them. She found him under the bridge, sitting on a concrete ledge. Kenji Nakamura looked older than 35, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, with watchful eyes. But there was intelligence in those eyes, deep pain, and something like fragile hope. "Thank you for coming, detective," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I know you're here to arrest me. That's your job. But first, let me tell you about my little sister Yuki, and what happened to her 20 years ago on this river." Kenji began to speak, and as he did, the sunset faded and city lights flickered on, reflecting in the water like scattered stars. "Yuki was only 10 when she disappeared," he began, his voice filled with 2 decades of grief. "I was 15. Our parents worked long hours, so Yuki and I took care of each other. We were all each other had." He paused, staring at the water. About 3 months before she vanished, Yuki started changing. She became quiet and withdrawn. She stopped drawing flowers and animals and started drawing the same thing over and over, a man's face, twisted like a nightmare. I asked her who it was, and she said, "No one important." "Just a bad dream," Kenji continued. I didn't push. I was 15, wrapped up in my own world. I thought it was a phase. His voice cracked. Then one night, I heard her crying. She was sitting on her bed, hugging her knees. She looked at me with these huge, frightened eyes and said, "Kenji, if something terrible happens to me, promise me you'll always remember I love you more than anything." I laughed it off. I said nothing would happen. I told her to go back to sleep. Kenji's hands clenched into fists. The next day, she didn't come home. I waited at the gate for hours. But she never came. Our parents called the police. They searched everywhere. They dragged this river. They combed every street. But she was just gone, vanished like she never existed. For 20 years, I've looked for answers. I've talked to everyone who knew her. But no one would tell me the truth. They all had their own versions of events, their own convenient memories. They wanted to forget Yuki ever existed. He turned to face Haruka directly, his eyes burning. But I couldn't move on. She was my little sister. She trusted me to protect her, and I failed. So I started watching them. All of them. Her classmates and teachers. I watched them build their lives, get married, have children. And I waited for one of them to slip up. And now? Haruka asked quietly. Now I'm running out of time, Kenji said with desperate urgency. The statute of limitations expires in 3 weeks. After that, even with proof, no one can be prosecuted. So I stopped waiting. I started visiting them one by one. I wanted them to remember, to feel guilty enough to finally tell the truth. He looked at her with pleading eyes. I never hurt anyone. I never stole anything. I just wanted them to remember my sister and what they did to her. Haruka sat beside him on the concrete ledge. The city hummed with distant traffic, but under the bridge they existed in their own bubble of silence. You broke into 8 homes, Haruka said calmly. You terrorized 8 people while they slept. That's a serious crime, Kenji. He nodded, accepting her words. I know. I'll accept whatever punishment you give me. But first, let me finish what I started. I'm so close. One of them knows exactly what happened to Yuki. One of them was there. How can you be so sure? Kenji reached slowly into his jacket. Haruka tensed, but he pulled out a worn notebook, the kind children use for school. The cover was faded, the pages yellowed after 2 decades. This was Yuki's secret diary. I found it hidden in our house years after she disappeared. I've read it 1,000 times. He opened it to a marked page and handed it to her with trembling hands. The handwriting was childish but neat. Haruka read with growing horror. April 15th, the first entry read. Today Sensei kept me after class again. He said I was special to him. He said we have secrets now that no one else can know. I don't like secrets. I want to tell Kenji, but Sensei said if I tell anyone, Kenji will get hurt badly. I don't want Kenji hurt. She turned the page with shaking hands. May 3rd, Sensei gave me a present today, a little doll with pretty hair. He said it's our special secret. He said I'm his favorite student. But I don't want to be his favorite. I just want to go home like all the other children. May 22nd. I told Michiko today about some of it. Not everything, because I'm too ashamed. She's my best friend. She said she won't tell anyone. But I'm still so scared. What if Sensei finds out? What if he hurts Kenji? The entries continued, each more disturbing. The Sensei was never named directly, probably out of fear, but the implication was clear. A teacher at Asakusa First Municipal had been grooming Yuki, manipulating her, threatening her to ensure silence. Haruka looked up at Kenji, her face pale. Who was this teacher? Do you know? Kenji's eyes blazed with 20 years of fury and pain. There were 3 teachers in Yuki's class that year. A young woman who left teaching after Yuki disappeared. An elderly man who died 10 years ago. And a man named Takeshi Mori, the 3rd victim I visited. He was their homeroom teacher. He kept her after class every day. Haruka's mind flashed to her case files. Takeshi Mori, 63, retired teacher, residence in Narama. The 3rd person the ghost had photographed while he slept. He's the one, Kenji said with certainty. I know it in my heart. But I need proof, real proof for a court. I need you to help me get it before the statute runs out. Haruka sat in stunned silence. She should arrest him right now. That was her job. That was the law she had sworn to uphold. But she didn't. Instead, she watched the last traces of sunset fade. She thought about Yuki, a 10-year-old girl betrayed by someone she trusted. She thought about her own younger sister, drowned years ago in an accident she couldn't prevent. She thought about justice, and how sometimes it moved too slowly to catch up with evil. If I help you, she said slowly, I'm compromising my career. I could be arrested. Fired. Disgraced. Everything I've worked for could be taken away. Kenji nodded solemnly. I know what I'm asking you to risk. But if I don't help you, Haruka continued, a child abuser walks free forever. And Yuki never gets the peace she deserves. She turned to face him fully, making a decision that would change both their lives. Here's how this works. I'm not breaking the law. I'm going to officially reopen Yuki's investigation. Through proper channels, with full department authority. And you are going to stay far away from Mori and every other victim until I've done my job. Kenji's eyes widened with surprise and fragile hope. No more visits, Haruka continued firmly. No more photographs. No more terrifying people in their homes. Understand? Kenji nodded slowly, a tear tracing down his hollow cheek. I understand. You have my word. I believe there's enough evidence to warrant a new investigation. Yuki's diary, Michiko's testimony, the connections to the school. It's enough to reopen the case officially. After that, we follow proper procedure. We gather evidence legally. If Takeshi Mori is guilty, we arrest him through the courts, not vigilante justice. Kenji was quiet for a moment, then nodded. 3 weeks, detective. That's all we have. I know. We don't have a moment to waste. They sat together in the growing darkness, 2 people bound by loss and the desperate need for truth. Then Kenji stood, ready to melt back into the shadows. Wait, Haruka said. Where will you be if I need to find you? He smiled sadly. Watching from the shadows, as always. But I'll stay far from Mori. You have my word. And then he was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as he'd arrived, leaving Haruka alone with the weight of her decision. The next morning, Haruka stood before a judge with Yuki's diary, Michiko's statement, and a timeline of the ghost's visits. It was barely enough, but it obtained a search warrant for Takeshi Mori's residence. At 10 a.m., she arrived at Mori's house in Narama with 4 officers. The house was modest, a small traditional home with a weathered wooden gate. An elderly man answered, his face creased with confusion. Detective Tanaka, Tokyo Metropolitan Police, Haruka announced, holding up the warrant. We have a court order to search your premises in connection with the disappearance of Yuki Nakamura, 20 years ago. Mori's face went pale, but he recovered quickly, stepping aside with practiced composure. Of course. I remember that case well. I cooperated fully at the time. I have nothing to hide. The search took 3 hours. Officers went through every room, every closet, every drawer. they found nothing incriminating at first. Haruka's heart sank with each passing hour. Then an officer called from the garden shed. "Detective, you need to see this." Haruka hurried outside. The officer had opened a small wooden chest buried under old gardening supplies. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, were items that made Haruka's blood run cold. A child's yellow backpack, faded but intact. A school notebook with Yuki Nakamura's name. A small doll, exactly like the one described in Yuki's diary. And photographs, dozens of them, of young girls from Asakusa First Municipal, all from 20 years ago. Mori stood in the garden, his face ashen. When Haruka turned to face him, he couldn't meet her eyes, staring at the ground like a caught child. "Takeshi Mori," Haruka said calmly, "you are under arrest for the murder of Yuki Nakamura. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." As officers handcuffed him, Mori's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down his aged face. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he whispered brokenly. "I loved her so much. I loved all of them. They were all so special to me." Haruka felt cold disgust. "You loved them so much you killed one and terrorized the rest for 20 years. Take him away." At the station, Mori initially refused to speak, demanding a lawyer. But when Haruka placed Yuki's diary in front of him, open to the pages describing his special attention, something inside him broke. "I'll talk," he said quietly, resigned. "I'll tell you everything. But I need you to understand, I never meant for her to die." Haruka sat across from him in the interrogation room, a recording device running. Through the one-way mirror, Yamashita and other officers watched. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." Mori took a shaky breath. "I was a young teacher, full of ideals about making a difference in children's lives. But somewhere along the way, my feelings towards some of them became inappropriate. I told myself it was just affection, mentorship. But it wasn't. It was something darker I refused to acknowledge." He paused, staring at his hands. "Yuki was so special to me. So trusting, so innocent. I started keeping her after class, telling her she needed extra help. Then I gave her little gifts, a doll, some candy. I told her we had special secrets. I told her that if she ever told anyone, her brother Kenji would get hurt. I was manipulating a child, and I knew it was wrong. But I couldn't stop. And then she disappeared," Haruka prompted. Mori nodded slowly, tears streaming. "She threatened to tell everyone the truth. She said she couldn't keep the secret anymore. I panicked. I told her to meet me after school by the river, to talk one last time." He paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "She came, trusting me like always. And when she said she was going to tell Kenji everything, I pushed her. I didn't mean to push her that hard. I just wanted her to stop talking. But she lost her balance, hit her head on a rock, and fell into the river. I watched her float away. I didn't try to save her. I just stood there frozen until she disappeared. Then I ran home, changed my clothes, and pretended nothing happened. For 20 years, I pretended while her brothers searched for answers. Her body was never found," Haruka said quietly. "The current is strong there. It probably carried her to the bay and out to sea. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself I wasn't a murderer. But every night, I knew what I'd done." Haruka sat back, the weight of 20 years of grief pressing down. "You destroyed a family. You destroyed a little girl's life. And then you watched her brother spend 2 decades searching while you lived free. Mori looked up, tears streaming. I know what I did is unforgivable. I'll spend the rest of my life in prison. That's what I deserve. The news of Mori's arrest spread rapidly across Japan. A retired teacher confessing to the murder of a 10-year-old girl, 20 years after her disappearance. The statute had been beaten by just 2 weeks. Justice served at the last possible moment. Haruka stood outside the station, giving a brief statement to the press. Behind her, police vehicles came and went. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with messages, interview requests. But she felt no triumph. Only exhausted satisfaction that justice had finally come. As the press conference ended, she saw a familiar figure across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of a building. Kenji Nakamura. He just stood there, watching from a distance as he had for so many years. Haruka crossed the street slowly, stopping a few feet from him. You heard the news? Kenji nodded, his face expressionless but his eyes glistening. He confessed. He admitted everything. Yes. Her body was never found, but his confession and the evidence are enough for a conviction. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Kenji was silent for a long moment. Then softly, almost to himself, he said, 20 years. 20 years of searching and hoping. And now it's finally over. How do you feel? Haruka asked gently. He looked at her directly, and for the first time she saw something other than pain in his eyes. A fragile peace was beginning to grow. I don't know yet. I've carried this weight so long, I'm not sure who I am without it. But I think Yuki can finally rest now. And maybe, just maybe, I can too. What will you do now? Kenji shrugged. Find a real home. Stop living in the shadows. Try to become a person again instead of a ghost. He studied her face. What about you? You helped a criminal. You made an alliance with a fugitive. Will there be consequences? Haruka thought of Yamashita's knowing looks, how he'd approved the warrant without questions. She thought of all the rules she'd bent. I'll deal with whatever comes. Some things are more important than following every rule. Kenji smiled for the first time, a real smile that reached his eyes. Thank you, detective. For everything. For giving me back my life. He turned to leave, then paused. If you ever need someone to watch your back, someone who knows how to move through shadows, I'll always be around. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowds, no longer a ghost haunting the edges of society. Just a man beginning to live again. 3 months later, Haruka stood on the banks of the Sumida River at sunset. The case was closed. Mori had been convicted and sentenced to life. The media had moved on. Life had returned to normal. She had received a formal reprimand for her handling of the investigation, too much independent action. But no suspension, no demotion. Yamashita had fought for her, arguing her unorthodox methods had solved a 20-year-old murder. She kept her job. In her hand, she held a small photograph. Not one of the ghost's Polaroids. This showed a grave marker in a small cemetery near the river. Yuki Nakamura's name carved in stone, with the dates of her birth and death, the latter now officially recorded as the day she disappeared. A proper grave at last, for a girl who had waited 20 years for peace. Kenji had arranged everything. He'd used what little money he had to purchase a plot near the river. She loved this river, he'd told her once. She said it looked like a ribbon of light at sunset. Now she can watch it forever. Haruka placed the photograph in her pocket and looked out over the dark water. The sunset was beautiful, a ribbon of orange and pink stretching across the sky, just as Yuki had described. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't need to turn. You came, she said softly. Kenji stopped beside her, looking out at the same view. He looked completely different now, healthier, with color in his cheeks. He wore clean clothes, his hair neatly cut. He had found a small apartment, a part-time job at a bookstore. He was becoming a real person again. "Every day at sunset," he said quietly. "I come here every day. It helps me feel closer to her." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and city lights twinkle on across the water. "I never properly thanked you," Kenji said after a long moment. "For believing in me. For helping me find the truth. For giving me back my life." Haruka shook her head slightly. "You don't need to thank me. You needed justice for your sister. That's just being human. What happens now? For you?" Haruka smiled faintly. "Now I go back to work. There are other cases waiting, other victims needing justice. The work never ends." "No," Kenji agreed softly. "It never ends." They watched as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and blue. Somewhere below, the river flowed endlessly, carrying its secrets to the sea. Kenji reached into his pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it gently and held it out. It was a Polaroid photograph, but unlike the ones that had haunted the city, this one showed something peaceful. A young girl with a round face and serious eyes, smiling at the camera, standing on this very riverbank with the sunset behind her. "I found this among Yuki's things," he explained softly. "It's the only photograph of her from the last year of her life. I wanted you to see her as she really was, not just as a victim or a case file. This was my sister. This was Yuki." Haruka studied the photograph carefully. The girl looked happy, truly happy, her eyes bright with the simple joy of being alive on a beautiful evening. It was impossible to look at that smiling face and not feel the weight of everything taken from her. "She's beautiful," Haruka whispered. "She really was." Kenji carefully wrapped the photograph and returned it to his pocket. "Yes, she was. And now, finally, she can rest." They stood together in silence for a long moment, two people bound by loss and the pursuit of truth. "I should go," Kenji said finally, though he made no move to leave. "I have work tomorrow. The bookstore opens at 8. Haruka nodded. "Take care of yourself, Kenji. If you ever need anything, I know where to find you," he finished with a small smile. "Watching from the shadows, remember?" He turned to leave, then paused one last time. "Detective? Thank you. For everything. For seeing me as a person instead of just a criminal. For helping me find peace." Haruka watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller against the city lights. When he disappeared into the evening crowds, she turned back to the river one last time. The water flowed on, dark and endless, carrying its secrets to the sea. Somewhere out there, Yuki Nakamura had found her rest at last. And in the silence between the fading sunset and the rising stars, there was finally peace. Haruka took a deep breath of the evening air, turned away from the river, and walked back toward the city. Toward her job. Toward the next case waiting for her attention. The work never ended. But sometimes, just sometimes, justice found a way. Behind her, the Sumida River flowed on, a ribbon of darkness under the stars, carrying the memory of a little girl who had loved the sunset into eternity.